The UFO disclosure process is heating up. Day by day, it's becoming increasingly more interesting. Yesterday, we discussed an anticipated bombshell UFO hearing slated for September, which is expected to showcase new first-hand UFO witnesses, whistleblowers. Today, let's go over the latest developments in this paradigm-shifting saga. On July 17th, journalist Matt Laszlo dropped an update on his X timeline and made the following statement about tweaking and including the UAP Disclosure Act in the NDAA.
So I've got some breaking news. Matt Laszlo from Askapol UAPs here, sitting on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. I was just talking to Congressman Burleson, and he says that he's in discussion with Senator Rounds and his team about tweaking and then including the UAPDA in this year's NDAA.
Let's take a moment to share some key context on the UAP Disclosure Act. On the same day, July 17th, the UAP Disclosure Fund posted the following on X, summarizing where things currently stand regarding the potential inclusion of the Act in the NDAA, and I quote, "The Senate's version of the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, is out, but it does not include the UAP Disclosure Act. Sign the petition, call your members of Congress." The current Senate text includes three notable UAP provisions. 1. Briefings on UAP intercepts, NORAD, NORTHCOM. 2. A classification guidance framework for UAP programs. 3. Centralized reporting of UAP data to AARO. These are meaningful steps toward oversight, but they are not enough. The UAP Disclosure Act, UAPDA, remains absent. Without it, there is no enduring legal framework to ensure public access, prevent indefinite classification, or hold agencies accountable for decades of secrecy. We've formally reached out to staff on the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, urging them to support the UAPDA's inclusion in the final NDAA. But congressional pressure only works when it's bipartisan and public. We need your voice. Transparency is a matter of national trust. It's time to pass the UAP Disclosure Act. Chris Mellon retweeted that post and added the following, and I quote, "Encouraging to see UAP provisions included in the fiscal year 2026 NDAA, marking the 5th time since 2020 that Congress has advanced legislation on this issue, a testament to growing bipartisan interest in oversight and transparency. I'm especially gratified by the language requiring prompt NORAD notification to AARO, data that will now be visible to Congress and, one hopes, ultimately to the public. There's never been hesitation to report Russian aircraft activity in the Arctic. It's long overdue for NORAD UAP data to reach AARO in a timely manner. Ideally, AARO will include this data in its public reports. But much more remains to be done. The UAP Disclosure Act is the essential next step. I urge Congress and the public to support its inclusion. Now, going back to Matt Laszlo's update from July 17th, he also said the following.
Burleson did remind me that he met with a new AARO team with David Grusch last month, or a couple months ago. And so that FOIA is a little outdated, but still interesting information to see that Mr. Grusch refused to sit down with Mr. Kirkpatrick, probably because nobody trusts Mr. Kirkpatrick. I don't even think Mr. Kirkpatrick trusts Mr. Kirkpatrick these days.
Hilariously, Matt Laszlo said that Kirkpatrick doesn't even trust Kirkpatrick these days. I recall Chris Mellon explaining in the past that UFO whistleblowers didn't want to meet with Kirkpatrick and instead opted to go directly to Congress because they didn't trust him. Kirkpatrick himself has also expressed that UFO believers should be considered a national security risk. This is demonstrated in Stephen Greenstreet's interview with him from May 8th, 2024.
I think that is disturbing and should be a flag for the national security community, because how can you then trust those people? If they are not objective enough to understand evidentiary-based assertions like that, how can you trust them with our national secrets?
I find this so funny because if the so-called believers end up right about UFOs, then the irony is they keenly perceived the national security risk that a UFO cover-up poses to the entire institution of government. In fact, I created a comic based on this very idea. Above the comic, I wrote, "Lies this big don't keep people safe. They make them snap." In the comic, a UFO gatekeeper says, "The truth is too dangerous." And a member of Congress responds, "But isn't destroying all trust in government more dangerous?" Honestly, this concept is worthy of an entire episode. Now, let's get to the most interesting part of today's update. In the next clip, Kirkpatrick himself talks about Grusch's issue with him.
Was David Grusch formally invited to speak with AARO and present evidence of his claims?
AARO invited him 5 times. That was documented and put into the record.
Did David Grusch actually ever come in?
At the time of my retirement, he had not.
Did David Grusch, in fact, refuse to do that?
He provided a couple of different reasons at various times of why he didn't want to come in. His lawyer contacted me and had a conversation about it. He did not want to come in.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Burleson tells Laszlo that Grusch met with AARO twice. Once alongside Burleson himself, and once alone, where he reportedly had a long conversation with them. Here's the moment from the interview.
What do you make of Grusch refusing to testify to AARO and Kirkpatrick, according to that one FOIA?
I don't think that he trusted Kirkpatrick.
Yeah. So he wasn't hiding from AARO.
No.
This is why I talk to someone you don't trust.
He and I met with AARO, and separately he and AARO had a long conversation.
So that was just purely Kirkpatrick. I don't trust this guy, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's my guess. I don't want to speak for Grusch.
Well, no, because you just reminded me.
That's my guess.
Well, you just reminded me that you guys.
That I said that.
Well, no. Well, you just reminded me that you guys sat down with AARO this year.
Yeah.
So that FOIA's old information.
My guess is probably to do with Kirkpatrick.
That's a big deal.
You're not being paid for this interview?
No, I'm not.
Why are you doing this?
It's a sense of service, you know. Call me a Boy Scout or whatever. When I saw the kind of wrongdoing I did, I don't want to be 60, 70 years old in the future and have that, coulda, shoulda, woulda kind of feeling where I could have made a difference. I did not want to live a life of regret.
That was back from June 11th, 2023. This was David Grusch's first video interview, a little after he came public through the debrief article. And so we should not be surprised that Grusch has not disappeared, that Grusch is in the game. He doesn't want to live a life of regret. He knows the opportunity he has. He sacrificed a lot to help us get to where we are and to help us push further beyond where we are. And it's wonderful to hear that he had a long conversation with AARO, and then he had another conversation where he met with AARO with Representative Burleson. So rest assured, David Grusch is in the fight. And furthermore, Jeremy Corbell recently said that there's a whole army, meaning there are many people, many whistleblowers who are ready to go public and pressure the U.S. government to stop lying to the American people as well as to all 8 billion people about their place in the universe. And I would say that they likely feel the way Grusch does, that they don't want to regret later, that they just stood on the sidelines, allowing the greatest discovery in scientific history to be only relevant to those who control the secrecy instead of relevant to our greatest scientists, philosophers, thinkers, sociologists, and so forth, which of course would be what we would call justice. Now, in the next clip, this is with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell when they were interviewing another whistleblower named Matthew Brown, who brought the secret program Immaculate Constellation to the public. Here he goes into a few things, including why is there secrecy surrounding the UFO issue?
You have thoughts about big picture stuff, who they are. Is it more than one they? Is it us from the future, ETs, interdimensionals? Do you think there's anybody in government who knows? And if they do know, is there any reason why this should stay secret? Or at least some of it should stay secret. The public cannot handle.
No. The only reason for secrecy is fear and greed. And that is the paradigm that we must confront and overcome. As for the public and what their reaction might be to this information, good, bad, indifference, I think we already have our answer. It's going to be indifference. Mm-hmm. Unless the stakes are made clear.
At this point, I think it's fair to boil down the motivation for the secrecy to be fear and greed without introducing more nuance. And I'll tell you why I think it's a fair interpretation. If it is true that the cover-up has been happening since the 30s, as David Grusch has conveyed, then there has been endless amounts of time for those in charge of the secrecy to change the policy and do what is right. And so you want to have mercy, you want to have good faith analysis, you want to be fair-minded, but at a certain point, what begins as understandable starts to meander into absurdity. If they don't want to come clean by this point, then maybe they just never want to come clean because it conflicts with their personal interests. And Brown labeled that as fear and greed. The greed would be, of course, the advantages it gives, for example, the corporations that have been given technology from alleged recovery incidents so that they can continue to study this technology and get derivative technology from the non-human intelligence technology and utilize that as a means for persistent profit. And the more that they learn studying these recovered craft, the more technologies they can sell back to the American government. It doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect replication of a UAP, but there could still be derivative technologies achieved that are useful for society that they can sell back to society, never reveal how they came up with these breakthroughs in understandings of science. So that would be, if you're like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whoever else might have these technologies, from a business standpoint, disclosure isn't necessarily something you want to happen because it would change everything. There would be scrutiny about why are you hoarding this technology, have explicit rights to this or exclusive rights to this technology, and the whole rest of the world just goes about their day completely oblivious to what you have and what it means for civilization. So that would be greed. That would be, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other things I could say. But in regards to fear, I think a big part of that, of course, would be self-preservation. People who have been involved in the secrecy do not want to be held accountable for it. They don't want to be seen as doing something that is morally very wrong. They just want to live their lives without any interruption. If there's disclosure, this is massive interruption to their lives, to people involved in the secrecy. Because now everyone's wondering, why did you go along with it? Why did you persist with it? Why did you not cooperate with Congress? Why did you not make any efforts to desist from this secrecy, even though the whole world wants answers to the second biggest question we've ever had, with whether we're alone or not? Now, some of these people in government might, and in aerospace corporations and in the intelligence community, they may tell themselves that it's for national security. But at a certain point, the national security argument loses substance and weight. Because what does it really amount to? What does the national security argument amount to? It amounts to, let's never tell the public the truth. Because if by 2025 they still don't want to tell the public the truth, then do they deserve the benefit of the doubt that they're going to want to tell the truth a year from now, or 2 years from now, or even 10 years from now, right? I mean, it's like an alcoholic who hasn't sought help for 10 years, but is telling you that the right time hasn't occurred yet. I mean, at a certain point, these notions lose credibility. And so, from my perspective, the fact that it's already 2025 and the indication is that those involved in the secrecy are continuing to resist transparency, that's a symptom of the desire to never have transparency. And I think I can say that rationally if it actually is true that the cover-up is even 70 years, and it might be much longer than that. So as much as I don't like to demonize, and I don't like to be antagonistic, and I don't have all the answers either, at a certain point, pragmatism has to contribute to my thought process. And pragmatism dictates that the idea of national security has to have a date where it ends. But in 2025, if the intelligence community and the government are incredibly reluctant to cooperate with Congress and to make a mockery of checks and balances, then that is just their position, and they have no intention of changing. You know, I'm all about giving a chance. But let's not forget that this all kind of went into next gear on December 16th, 2017, with the New York Times article. We are many years later, and we're still fighting tooth and nail just to get an admission of our place in the universe. So when Matthew Brown says it's fear and greed, I'm inclined to agree with that assessment. I'm open to being persuaded otherwise, but at the end of the day, I'm not here to be persuaded by someone's arguments that are highly subjective and self-serving. I'm here to be as rational as I can. In the following clip on the YouTube channel What Bitcoin Did, Matthew Pines goes into what the UFO cover-up relates to. It's really interesting. We'll discuss it further after the clip.
Like in the 60s, you know, when you had this countercultural movement was basically driven by a bunch of people taking LSD and psilocybin. And they were looking at reality now in a fundamentally different way. And they were like, well, the structures of power maybe aren't as legitimate as I've been told since I was a kid. And the government's like, can't have that, right? So we need to make sure that we implant a taboo, massive social stigma. You know, LSD, psilocybin, these things will fry your brain, melt your brain. UFOs, total fiction, taboo. Only weird schizos and tinfoil hat wearing people think UFOs are real. Isn't quite a convenient social taboo. When all the taboos are designed to kind of reinforce a certain power structure, to partition human knowledge, especially human knowledge that might otherwise be destabilizing for a structure of power and the social order, you know, sus.
You should probably pay attention.
You should probably pay attention. You should be like, well, question, why do I think that's a stigma? All right. Like, why do I believe that? Like, it was because of the process of acculturation, the media I consume, the reinforcing narratives that have been designed, you know, very consciously around these things.
Here's a key component of what Matthew Pines relayed, and I quote, "When all the taboos are designed to kind of reinforce a certain power structure, to partition human knowledge, especially human knowledge that might otherwise be destabilizing for a structure of power and the social order, you know, sus." That's a really interesting analysis. And it makes you wonder how many motivations there might have been to stigmatize UFOs. He draws on the counterculture in the 60s. He said it was fueled by LSD and psilocybin, and how people taking that started to see the structure of government differently. And then, as I understand, he's applying that potentially to knowledge of UAP. And the late Stanton Friedman once gave 3 reasons for why governments cover up UFOs. One of the reasons he gave is because if there was disclosure, then people across the world would stop seeing themselves as like Chinese or Russian or Americans or French, but would start seeing themselves as earthlings, and no government wants to lose that power. So that really is an interesting analysis. And it goes back to what Matthew Brown said, that there's no real good reason for the cover-up. It's greed and it's fear. And maybe a big part of the fear is when all the rules get rewritten. Because isn't that what disclosure would ultimately do? It would rewrite all the rules. And what I mean by rules, I mean assumptions, assumed correctness that we have about civilization. They're endless as it pertains to the cover-up. From scientists saying, we would know if something like this was going on because NHI, non-human intelligence, would be documented by all the sensor systems that civilians have. Now, what if that rule is not true? Because that's the rule they made. They made that rule based upon assumed correctness instead of scientific reality. There's another rule that would be demolished, which is repeated ad nauseum by people who are respected as being highly intelligent. They say, if such a cover-up was persisting, it would have gotten into the public by now. Which, of course, is kind of silly. We're talking about the cover-up right now, but I think what they mean is it would have been proven by now that governments are covering up UAP. And governments, they say, are not good at keeping secrets. So that would be another rule that would be demolished. And then be other rules that be demolished. One of those rules, frankly, is the assumption that we don't live in an absurd universe, that the universe is sensical in many respects, that it's natural in many respects, that there is only a certain measurement or threshold for which weirdness can exist. Beyond that is just fantasy. But what does disclosure do to that assumed correctness, to that rule? Demolishes it. It eradicates it. It eviscerates it. You have to deal with abductions. You have to deal with Earth bases, underwater Earth bases, maybe even underground. Maybe the bases are not stationary. Maybe it's just large craft that can move wherever they want, but we could still consider that a base. You would have to deal with deeper notions of the construct of reality that you never had to before. Where do they come from? What is their true origin? Are we related to them? Have they meddled with our evolution in various possible ways? Not just meddling with our DNA, which is a possibility, but have they intentionally influenced our development over the eons? And it goes on and on and on. So disclosure kind of destroys assumed correctness. And frankly, our society and our psyche is largely entrenched in assumed correctness. In fact, it's my perception that this is one of the biggest problems with humanity, and that's an article I will write at some point. Assumed correctness leads to hypocrisy, it leads to double standards, it leads to poor critical thinking, and it leads to arrogance, it leads to overconfidence, it leads to inflated ego, it leads to a lack of doubt. Basically, disclosure removes the rug from underneath us. The rug that we thought was permanent. The rug that we thought was the way reality is. And maybe governments don't want that because it makes everything so much more complex. It is disruptive to perception itself. Not even just a specific belief or philosophy, but to perception itself. It reminds me of the scene in The Matrix when Neo was preparing himself to get unplugged from the Matrix, and he's looking into the mirror and it's all distorted. He puts his finger in it and he's kind of freaking out. And if I recall, Morpheus said something like, have you ever been in a dream and wondered if the dream was real and not what you left behind? Something like that. I don't have the script in front of me, but that's disclosure. Disclosure removes predictability. Disclosure removes assumed correctness. I would argue that disclosure removes arrogance. How can you be arrogant after a revelation like that? I mean, imagine, just as an example, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Is he going to be arrogant after disclosure? I'm not saying he's arrogant. He might be a little smug. But if he does have some degree of arrogance, that we might all have in various ways, but if he does have some degree of arrogance, how well is that arrogance going to survive after disclosure? There's endless amounts to say about this, and I'm going to leave it there. But the idea that I think Matthew Pines was alluding to, that maybe part of why UFOs were stigmatized is because governments realized how destabilizing disclosure would be and how it would shift our perception of reality. I mean, that's fascinating. And that exceeds national security. That is a completely different category. That is about control. That is about wanting the flock to behave and perceive a very specific way and not to deviate. And that is tyranny. And that is wrong. And that is why the cover-up is immoral, because it takes away our freedom. I hope you catch my drift and get what I'm saying. But we'll leave it at that. I really appreciate you watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you could check out my Patreon. You could become a YouTube member. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all YouTube members, patrons, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.